Hi guys, this is Sir Janus saying welcome to another fun-filled day of learning. Today, we are going to focus on grade 9 science, specifically on quarter 1, module 1 for week 1 and 2, which deals with respiratory and circulatory systems working with other organ systems. So are you ready? What do you need to know? Now, this module will make you realize that the different parts of your body are wonderfully created so that each part can perform its function and keep you alive. At the end of this module, you should be able to explain how the respiratory and circulatory systems work together to transport nutrients, gases, and other molecules to and from the different parts of the body. You might be wondering how man would fare without his basic needs. Now, human survivability revolves in the role of 3. A human can live only 3 weeks without food, 3 days without water, but only 3 minutes without air. Now, this goes to show how important the respiratory system of a human's body. The respiratory system provides the body with the ability for gas exchange with the external environment. Now, it is consist with branching tubes which has its end in close contact with the blood vessels. Now, this is where oxygen is released into the bloodstream and carbon dioxide exits. Anatomically, the respiratory system is divided into 2 distinct parts: the upper respiratory tract and the lower respiratory tract, which has its own specific functions. Given the informations earlier, what do you think is the main function of the respiratory system? Any guess or any ideas? Now, the respiratory system is responsible for supplying oxygen to the body and removing carbon dioxide. Passageway of air into the body usually starts at the nose. Now, one prominent feature or noticeable feature of the nose is that it has its nose hairs. So, any idea as to what its purpose? As embarrassing and troublesome it may be for some, but actually the nose plays a vital role in the process of respiration. Aside from filtering the particles in the air, it also moistens it and warms it at the same time. Now, this is the reason why it is not advisable to breathe in through the mouth, since bacteria and other particles could be easily ingested into the body. Before we proceed on to the next part of the respiratory system, let us try this fun activity. So try and swallow and breathe at the same time. Could you do it? What have you noticed? So based on the activity, it is impossible to try to swallow and breathe at the same time since your epiglottis is closed during the swallowing reflex. So let us also try this one. Open your mouth and breathe through your nose and record your observation. You can also pinch your nose while you are breathing. What happened? What have you noticed? Just like on the first activity, your air is quickly shut off. So your epiglottis is closed, ensuring that only air is going to your lungs. So this is a sort of protection of the body. It is related to drowning. Now, drowning is death from asphyxia due to the suffocation caused by a liquid entering the lungs and preventing the absorption of oxygen. Now, this leads to a lack of oxygen to the brain, which eventually would lead to death. So what is epiglottis and what is its function? Now, epiglottis is a flap of cartilage on the roof of the tongue, which is depressed during swallowing to cover the opening of the windpipe. If you are going to look at this one, you could clearly see that when you swallow, the epiglottis closes which prevents the food from entering the trachea or the windpipe. Now, kindly turn your attention here. It is important to remember that epiglottis closes when you swallow but opens when you breathe. The next structure where inhaled air passes through is the larynx. It is a hollow muscular organ forming an air passage to the lungs and holding the vocal cords. It is important to note that males have a larger larynx than females, thus the Adam's apple. Now, boys and girls' vocal cords are the same size until a boy's teenage years, where the cords grow and his voice changes, and thus gives a distinct difference between the two. Let's try another activity. Run your fingers up and down along the front of your neck to feel for the trachea. Now, if you're a male, that is directly below your Adam's apple, but nonetheless, it is clearly distinguishable because of its characteristic. It would feel like a vacuum cleaner hose or a washing machine hose. The trachea is a tube in your throat that carries air into your lungs. Now, if you could turn your attention here, here is an actual photo of a trachea. Quick question for 30 seconds. Why would these rings be made of cartilage and not of bones? Why do you think that tracheas are made of cartilage? So you may use the pictures below as a clue. So here is a vacuum cleaner with two different or distinct structures. So you have 10 seconds. 9, 8, 7, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and time's up. The answer would be that the cartilage gives it the advantage of being So the oxygen moves from the alveoli to the blood through the capillaries, whereas the carbon dioxide moves from cells into the capillaries to be exhaled and to be released into the environment. So before we proceed with our assessment, let us summarize all what we have discussed so far. So here are the major organs in the respiratory system. Now, it all started with the nose or the nasal cavity. Its function is to warms, moistens, and filters air as it is inhaled. Then, the air passes through the pharynx or the throat, wherein its function is the passageway for air and leads to the trachea. Next one is the larynx, also known as the voice box. So this is where vocal cords are located. Next part is the trachea, commonly known as the windpipe. It is lined with fine hairs called cilia, which filters air before it reaches the lungs. From the trachea, the air now moves into the bronchi, wherein it branches at the end of the trachea, each led to a lung. Next one, from the bronchi to the bronchioles. A bronchioles or bronchioles is a network of smaller branches leading from the bronchi into the lung tissue and ultimately to the air sacs. Now, this air sacs is known as the alveoli, wherein it is the functional respiratory units in the lung where gases are exchanged. Here are the components of the upper respiratory tract that we have discussed. Then, here are its functions. So there are 5 major functions of the upper respiratory tracts. First one is the passageway for respiration. In the upper respiratory tract, you can also locate the receptors for smell. It also filters incoming air to filter larger foreign materials. At the same time, it moistens and warms incoming air, and it also serves as resonating chambers for voice. Here are also the components of the lower respiratory tract, from the larynx down to the basic unit for respiration, which is known as the alveoli. The functions for the lower respiratory tract are as follows. So we have discussed this already, from larynx to the trachea and of course to the lungs, wherein it's transport air to the alveoli for gas exchange. Now let's take a look on the breathing mechanism of man. First, air enters through the nostrils in the nose. Now after this one, the nostrils are provided with hairs which prevent dust particles from going in. So that's one feature of a nostril. Now when the air enters into the nasal cavity, it then leads to the larynx, or also known as the voice box. From the larynx, the air passes into the windpipe or trachea and then into the lungs through smaller tubes known as the bronchi. Now from here, the bronchi branch out into smaller tubes known as the bronchioles, which in turn end into the tiny air sacs called the alveoli. Now, in the alveoli, these are richly supplied with blood through a dense network of capillaries around them. This time, we are going to explore the breathing mechanisms in humans. We are going to determine the mechanics as to how humans breathe, or the process of respiration. So why do we really need to breathe? Any ideas? Okay, so the breathing system is used by the body to get the oxygen needed for respiration, as what we have discussed earlier. But aside from that, it is also used to get rid of one of the waste products of respiration, the gas known as the carbon dioxide. So that's the main purpose why we breathe. We need to establish that breathing in and breathing out are two different things. When you breathe in, it is known as inhalation. So when you do this, you breathe air including oxygen into your lungs. On the other hand, breathing out is called exhalation. When you exhale, you breathe out the contents of your lungs and get rid of the waste gas called carbon dioxide. Let us take a look on the inhalation process, or what happens when you breathe in. So we're going to have two views here, the front and the side view. Now when you breathe in, you can see that the rib cage moves out while the diaphragm moves down, and this causes the volume of the chest cavity to increase. Now let us take a look as to what happens when you breathe out, or the exhalation process. Now as you can see that when you exhale, the rib cage moves down and in while the diaphragm moves up, and by doing so, the volume of the chest cavity decreases. Now, let us push through on lessons 3 and 4, which now the heart is a unique structure in a human's body. It is made up of a very special muscle called a cardiac muscle. The cardiac muscle gives the ability of the heart to keep on beating for the whole of a person's life without getting tired. Now, a moment's pause or an aberration on the heart would have a detrimental effects on the health of a human. Let us proceed with the characteristics of a heart. Now, the heart is about the size of the fist, located in between the lungs, in the center of the chest. Now, it pumps blood continuously around the body, and an organism can lose consciousness within just a few seconds if the brain is deprived of blood. And the heart begins beating about 5 to 6 weeks after conception in fetuses. structure of the releases platelets or thrombocytes stick to the exposed collagen fibers, forming a plug to stop the bleeding. So the platelets become activated and release clotting factors called thromboplastins. Through a complex cascade, thromboplastins convert thrombin into thrombin. So this process requires calcium and vitamin K. So thrombin catalyzes the conversion of soluble fibrinogen into soluble fibrin. So this fibrin now forms a fibrous mesh that would now in turn trap blood cells and strengthens the platelet plug, forming now the blood clot. Now, when the wound heals, the clot is eventually reabsorbed by another complex process called fibrinolysis. So the main enzyme controlling this process is called the plasmid. So here is a summary on how does a blood clot form. The last structure of the circulatory system is a straw-colored liquid that carries the cells and the platelets which help clot. So this is also known as the plasma. Now, it also contains useful things like carbon dioxide, glucose, amino acids, proteins, minerals, vitamins, hormones, and waste materials like urea.